My father-in-law, Arthur, raised his glass. To Declan, he said, his voice beaming with pride. Another record quarter. You make this family proud, son. My husband, Russell, froze mid-bite. I watched his knuckles turn white as he gripped his wine glass. He hated when his younger brother, Declan, got praise. A dark, jealous energy rolled off him. He slammed his glass down, the red wine sloshing onto the white linen tablecloth. Well, at least some of us are carrying our weight, Russell boomed, his voice dripping with bitterness. The table went silent. He turned his hot, angry glare on me. I'm drowning in work, pulling 80-hour weeks, while Karina here is busy with, what is it, dear? Crayons and craft paper. He let out a short, ugly laugh. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I kept my face perfectly still. Her history teacher's salary barely covers her car. It's embarrassing. He looked back at his father. So I'm making an executive decision. I'm taking over her finances. Effective immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. It was worse than his yelling. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, each tick a hammer blow against the quiet. Declan looked down at his plate, his ears bright red. He hated confrontation. Russell's mother, Alice, just sighed and gave me that look. The one I hated, the look of pure, agonizing pity. She was already mentally preparing to comfort me, to pat my hand and tell me Russell didn't mean it. But he did mean it. Russell was leaning back in his chair, smirking, waiting for the tears. He was waiting for me to break, to apologize, to make myself small. I held his gaze. I didn't flush. I didn't look away. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, the cold liquid steadying my nerves. Then, I calmly placed my folded linen napkin on the table. Is that before or after you wire the next $750,000 to Apex Sports Management? I asked, my voice perfectly level. The pity on Alice's face vanished, replaced by a sharp, confused frown. Russell's smirk froze. Russell's face went white. The ruddy, confident color drained so fast he looked sick. What are you talking about? He stammered. His eyes darted around the table, looking for support, but he found none. His brother, Declan, leaned forward, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. Declan was the trusting one. He ran the day-to-day operations of their shared company, MNL Properties, but Russell handled the high-level finances. Apex Sports? Declan asked, looking from Russell to me. Is that a new vendor, Russell? I haven't seen any invoices for them. Should I know that name? I kept my eyes locked on my husband. I watched the bead of sweat form on his temple. No, Declan, I said, my voice still quiet and cold. It's not a vendor. It's a Shell LLC registered in Delaware. I believe your personal lawyer, the one you met with on May 14th, set it up 3 months ago. An LLC with no website, no registered agent, and no business address. Am I wrong, Russell? He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no words came out. Russell suddenly exploded. He threw his napkin onto his half-eaten steak, the sound making his mother jump. This dinner is over, he roared. He was on his feet in a second, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin hard enough to bruise. We're leaving. Now. He dragged me toward the front door, ignoring his father's shocked Russell and his mother's weak protest. The ride home was 5 miles of terrifying, absolute silence. He drove too fast, his hand strangling the steering wheel. The second we were inside our house, he shoved the door closed and ran to the home office. What did you do? He hissed, his voice a panicked whisper. You humiliated me. You're trying to ruin me. I heard him slam his hands on the keyboard, the clicks frantic. He was trying to change the passwords to lock me out. I'm locking you out, he yelled. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. You can't, I said. I already froze them. Russell spun around in his expensive leather office chair, his face a mask of disbelief. What? He whispered, his voice hoarse. What do you mean, you froze them? I held up my phone, my bank app already open. I've been watching the MNL business accounts for 6 months, Russell. His eyes widened. It started small. Dinners for 2 on the company card on nights. You told me you were working late. A receipt for $1,000 bottle of scotch you don't even drink. Then I saw the wires. I took a step into the room, his panic almost a physical thing in the air. I put a trace on the outgoing transfers. You use the same fake invoice code every time. Consulting 7B. Over and over. You're not just a liar, Russell. You're lazy. I let the phone drop to my side. He thought I was a simple, naive teacher. He forgot that history teachers are, by trade, professional researchers. But the dinners weren't what worried me, Russell. It's where the rest of the money was going. Russell's face crumpled. He was already forming the words to deny the dinners, to lie about the late nights, to tell me I was crazy. I didn't give him the chance. I'm not interested in your affair, I said flatly, cutting him off. His mouth snapped shut. The shock on his face was almost comical. He was prepared to fight about a mistress. He was not prepared for what came next. I honestly don't care who you're having dinner with, I continued, my voice as cold as the glass of water I'd held at dinner. I am interested in the $2.4 million you've systematically embezzled from the company you share with your brother. The last bit of air seemed to leave his lungs. All his rage, all his arrogance just evaporated. He slumped into his expensive office chair, his shoulders caving in. He finally looked like what he was, a small, cornered man, the bully who had just been punched in the mouth. He was finally, blessedly silent. I had been planning this moment for months, and his silence was exactly the victory I needed. You've been funding a secret sports agency, I continued, my voice clinical. I felt like I was giving a history lecture, not confronting my husband about grand larceny. Apex Sports Management. You've been siphoning money from M&L, using Declan's trust fund as collateral and the company's main line of credit to do it. You've been falsifying invoices for consulting fees from fake vendors to cover the transfers. I walked over to his desk, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I tapped his computer monitor, where an email I'd sent 2 minutes ago was waiting for him, marked urgent. That's the full audit. I hired a forensic accountant 3 months ago. A very good one. I leaned down, my face just inches from his. The woman with the tiny salary you tried to shame at dinner? The one who barely covers her car. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. She has receipts. Every single one. He didn't even have the strength to open the email. He just stared at the screen in pure, abject horror. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting at the M&L Properties office. I was there first, at 8 a.m. sharp, sitting at the head of the polished conference table. Russell showed up next. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his coffee. He didn't look at me. He just took a seat at the far end of the table and stared at the wall. Declan was the last to arrive, rushing in at 8:05, looking concerned and confused. Karina? What's going on? He asked, a worried smile on his face. Russell wouldn't say a word. Is everything okay? I didn't waste time with small talk. I took the thick, 2-inch binder I had placed in front of my chair and slid it across the table. It landed in front of Declan with a heavy, final thud. Declan, I said, my voice gentle but firm. I'm so sorry. You need to read this. Declan spent the next hour in absolute, tomb-like silence. The only sound in the entire office was the sharp, rhythmic shing of pages being turned, one after another. I watched his face as he worked his way through the evidence I had so carefully organized. I saw him trace his own signature, a clear forgery, on a loan application for $250,000. I saw him stare unblinking at the fake invoices from shell companies, all matching the wire transfers to Apex Sports. He read the bank statements showing how Russell had used his, Declan's, personal trust as collateral for a high-risk loan he never even knew existed. He read for an entire, agonizing hour, never once looking up. When he finally reached the last page, he slowly, deliberately closed the binder. He didn't look at his brother. He looked at me, his eyes hollow with devastation. Is this all true? He whispered. Yes. Russell whispered from the other end of the table. He was still staring at the wall, unable to look his brother in the eye. It's true. And with that one admission, he finally broke. The tension, the fear, and the shame he'd been holding back all morning exploded. He put his head in his hands and started to sob, his shoulders shaking. The confession tumbled out of him in a pathetic, desperate rush. He said he felt trapped in the boring property business, that he was sick of being in Declan's shadow. He said he wanted something exciting and all his. He'd met a sports agent who promised him the world, and he just got pulled in. He swore he was going to pay it all back, that he had a few big clients about to sign, and that Declan would have never ever noticed. He sounded like a child, and for the first time, I felt a small, cold flicker of pity. Declan's face, which had been soft with pain, hardened into a mask of ice. He was no longer the younger, trusting brother. He was a man who had been deeply and fundamentally betrayed. "Payback," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You leveraged our entire family's legacy, Russell. You used my trust fund." He slammed his hand flat on the binder, the sound echoing in the silent room. "We're done. I'm calling the police." Russell shot up from his chair, knocking it over. Pure, unadulterated panic flashed in his eyes. "No, Declan, please. You can't. It'll destroy Dad. It'll destroy everything. It was a mistake, a stupid mistake. But don't call the police, please." He was begging now, all the arrogance from the dinner party gone, replaced by the raw, ugly fear of a cornered animal. But Declan was already reaching for his phone, his thumb hovering over the dialer. "I don't care," Declan said, his voice breaking with fury. "You did this to us." Before he could press the call button, I stepped in. "No police," I said firmly. Declan's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "Karina, he stole. I know exactly what he did," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "And it ends here in this room, not in a courtroom." I turned my full attention to my husband, who was looking at me with a desperate, pathetic hope. "This stays in the family, but it stops now." I laid out my terms, each one a nail in the coffin of his old life. "You will tell your parents the truth, the whole truth, tonight. You will agree to a full, immediate buyout of your half of the company, at a valuation I approve, not you. And you will go to therapy. With me. We will deal with this." I let the terms hang in the air. "Or I walk. And this binder," I tapped the thick cover, "goes directly to the district attorney. Your choice, Russell." He didn't hesitate. He just nodded, his body trembling as he whispered, "Okay. Okay. Anything. Just okay." A week later, we reconvened at the Smith family home for dinner. The air was heavy, like the silence before a funeral. Russell, pale and humbled, sat at the head of the table. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 7 days. With a shaking voice, he confessed everything. He told them about the secret company, the forged signatures, the fake invoices, and the $2.4 million he had stolen. He told them how he had used Declan's trust as collateral. My mother-in-law, Alice, cried silently into her napkin, her face a mask of grief. My father-in-law, Arthur, a man of rigid integrity who had built M&L from nothing, was completely speechless with disappointment. He just stared at his eldest son, his face ashen. The man who had shamed his wife for her salary was revealed, in that very same room, as a common thief. And me. There was no pity for me this time. As I sat there, a silent witness to the truth, I felt Arthur and Alice's eyes turn to me. There was only a new, startling, and undeniable respect. The next month was absolute hell. Lawyers and auditors, all hired and directed by Declan and me, swarmed the M&L offices. They went through every file, every hard drive, every bank statement from the last 5 years. It was a brutal, meticulous, and surgical divorce of the business. We were separating every asset, every liability, every client. I saw Russell and Declan have one final, brutal argument in the parking lot one afternoon. It was all yelling, years of resentment pouring out of both of them. It was the last fight of their business partnership. It ended not with a resolution, but with both of them exhausted and defeated, walking away in opposite directions. They both knew I held all the cards. In the end, they agreed to my terms. The company was split. Russell was left with his secret, now worthless sports agency, and a mountain of personal debt. Declan was left with the clean, restructured, and solvent half of his father's legacy. The sudden and messy dissolution of M&L Properties was big news in the local business journal. The official, lawyer-approved story was creative differences and a desire to pursue new independent ventures. It was clean, boring, and corporate. But an angry administrative assistant, a woman who had worked for Declan for 10 years and adored him, leaked the real story to a reporter. The article came out a week later, and the headline was explosive. Russell Smith tried to build a secret company with stolen funds, and his teacher wife took him down. The story, detailing how a quiet high school history teacher had meticulously uncovered a massive, multi-year fraud, went viral locally. My phone started ringing with calls from reporters. My email inbox was flooded. I ignored every single one. I was too busy trying to figure out what to do with my broken marriage and the wreckage Russell had made of our lives. I was at home, sitting at our kitchen table, trying to grade papers on the fall of the Roman Empire. The house was quiet, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the heavy, awkward silence of two people living in the same space but worlds apart. Russell was a ghost. He left for his mandatory therapy sessions, then went to his new, tiny rented office, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. My phone, on the other hand, buzzed constantly. Calls from reporters, texts from concerned friends, all wanting the gossip. I ignored them all. I was too busy trying to figure out if my marriage was even salvageable. Then, a different notification popped up. A private message on LinkedIn. The name on the profile made my heart stop. Donald Woods. He was the revered, semi-retired founder of Woods Global, a massive, nationwide logistics corporation. He was a legend, the kind of man who built empires from nothing. I opened the message, my hand trembling slightly. It was short, direct, and powerful. Ms. Smith, I read the story in the business journal. I believe you are the person I've been looking for. Please call my private line. He included a number. I met Donald Woods at his private club 2 days later. It was all dark wood, old leather, and silence. Men in expensive suits spoke in hushed tones, and I felt like a fraud in my best and only blazer. I was a history teacher who had stumbled into the lion's den. He was in his late 60s, with a sharp suit and even sharper eyes. He looked tired, but the moment I sat down, his gaze was intense. My company is sick, Miss Smith, he said, skipping the small talk entirely. He stirred his coffee. We have parasites, embezzlers, fraudsters, people I trusted, who've been with me for decades. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. I've been trying to retire for 5 years, but I can't leave the keys to a rotten kingdom. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. The way you handled your husband, it wasn't just revenge. He tapped the table for emphasis. It was precise. You saved the business, even as you exposed the fraud. You gave your brother-in-law a clean break. That's what impressed me. I don't need a bulldog, Miss Smith, Mr. Wood said, setting his cup down with a quiet click. I don't need a team of cutthroat lawyers to burn the place down. I already have those. I need a surgeon. He paused, letting his words sink in. My board thinks I'm crazy, but I think I need one person with a calculator and a spine. He looked at me, and I felt like he was seeing right through me, past the teacher and into the person who had spent 6 months meticulously tracking $2.4 million. I'm offering you the new role of Chief Compliance and Oversight Officer for all of Woods Global. It's a position I just created. For you. I was stunned. I couldn't breathe. You will report directly to me, and only to me. You will have full authority to find every parasite and clean my company, top to bottom, whatever it takes. You'll have an unlimited budget and my full backing. I was a history teacher. He was offering me one of the most powerful positions in the city. Well, he asked. I accepted. My first day at Woods Global was a blur of high-level meetings, spreadsheets that made my head spin, and NDAs. The salary they offered was triple what Russell had been making, even with the money he was stealing. I came home late, my mind buzzing with strategies, data points, and a kind of energy I hadn't felt in years. I was exhausted, but I was alive. Russell was in the kitchen. He was just waiting. He'd been to therapy and then to his small, rented office, trying to rebuild his half of the business, now renamed Smith Properties. He looked up when I walked in, and the role reversal was stark. He was the one waiting at home, unsure of his place, while I was out in the corporate world, building an empire. He looked hesitant, almost small, as he wiped his hands on a dish towel. How was it? He asked, his voice quiet. It was the first time in a month he'd spoken to me first. It was intense, I said, kicking off my new, expensive heels and loosening the blazer I'd bought for the job. The wool was scratching my neck. The books are a complete mess. It's worse than I thought, but I think I can fix it. I dropped my briefcase by the door, the weight of it thudding on the floor. Russell just watched me. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer a half-baked opinion. He just watched, and I could literally see him processing the new woman standing in front of him. This wasn't the embarrassing wife he had mocked at the dinner table. This wasn't the little history teacher with the tiny salary. This was the chief compliance and oversight officer for Woods Global. He nodded slowly, then walked to the wine fridge without a word. He opened a bottle of white, the good kind I liked, the kind he used to call overpriced. He poured a single glass and handed it to me. It was a simple gesture, but it felt enormous, like a truce. I'm sure you can, he said. And for the first time in our entire marriage, I heard genuine, unadulterated respect in his voice. It wasn't a solution. It didn't fix the $2.4 million, but it was a start. Declan, now running his own successful and fully audited firm, Declan Smith Properties, finally agreed to meet Russell for coffee. I wasn't there. This was something they had to do alone. Our therapy sessions had made it clear that I couldn't be the bridge between them. Russell had to build that bridge himself, or not at all. He told me about it later that night, his voice subdued. He said the tension was still there, so thick you could cut it with a knife. They sat for 10 minutes just stirring their cups, the silence heavy. But Declan had been the one to speak first. You're a fool, Russell, he'd said, his voice flat. And I don't know if I'll ever trust you with $1 again. But you're my brother. Russell just nodded, accepting the judgment. He apologized, not just for the money, but for the trust he'd broken, for the risk he'd put their father's legacy in. They talked for 2 hours. They agreed to meet for the holidays for their parents' sake, but I knew it was for them too. The business was divided for good. Russell had lost his partner, but the family, slowly and painfully, was starting to heal. At Woods Global, I didn't waste any time. Mr. Woods had called me a surgeon, and I intended to act like one. I assembled a small, lethal team of forensic accountants, people like the one I had hired to investigate Russell. They were quiet, overlooked analysts from other departments, people who, like me, noticed things. We didn't march in and demand answers. We just read, using the same precise, quiet methods I'd used on MNL. We dove into the procurement department. It didn't take long. The patterns were almost identical to Russell's. Inflated invoices, phantom vendors, and kickbacks. It was a massive scheme involving 3 senior executives and 2 of their largest suppliers. It was a good old boys club that had been bleeding the company dry for years. I presented my findings, a 200-page binder, just like the one I'd given Declan, to Donald Woods. The next day, he and I fired all 3 executives. My first quarterly report showed we had already saved the company $30 million. The board, which had been skeptical of me, was stunned into silence. Mr. Woods just smiled. The business journals ran a news story. The old, gossipy headline about the teacher wife who took down her husband was gone. The new one on the front page of the financial section read, "The teacher wife who took down a fraud ring now cleaning up Woods Global." My name was suddenly everywhere. But this time, I wasn't a local curiosity. I was being lauded as a brilliant corporate strategist. The article praised my surgical precision and unflinching ethics. It didn't just mention my history degree. It celebrated it, calling me a corporate historian who could uncover the secrets buried in the data. My inbox, which had been full of reporters, was now full of invitations to speak on panels about ethics and corporate compliance. The very skills I had used to expose my husband, my attention to detail, my research, my unwillingness to accept a lazy answer were now the foundation of a career I had never, ever dreamed of. I had found my calling, and it had been born from the ashes of my husband's betrayal. I was at my new desk, which was bigger than my old classroom, preparing for a compliance seminar when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Russell. He had forwarded me the new article from the Business Journal, the one with my picture on the front. Below the link, he had typed one simple word, wow. I looked at it for a long moment. It was so much more than just a word. It was an admission. It was an apology. It was his white flag. He was starting from the bottom, ethically and financially, trying to rebuild his small company with no partners and no trust. He was in a tiny rented office, and I was in a corner suite. I was soaring. I felt a strange, complex mix of pity and pride. He was still the man who betrayed me, but he was also the man who was clearly, painfully, trying to be better. I couldn't go back to the way things were, but maybe we could build something new. I texted him back, my fingers firm. See you at dinner. Don't be late. It was simple, practical, and a clear signal of our new dynamic. It was the Smith family dinner, exactly 1 year after the original ambush. The table was set with the same china, the same heavy silverware, the same scent of rosemary and garlic. But the vibe was completely different. It was quiet, respectful. The tension that used to choke the room was gone. I was telling a story about a difficult 3-day negotiation I just finished with a shipping union in Baltimore. They were tough, I said, but they were hiding a payroll discrepancy. Once I showed them the numbers, they folded. Russell and Declan, sitting on opposite sides of the table, were both listening, rapt. My father-in-law, Arthur, waited for me to finish, then raised his wine glass. His hand was steady. To Karina, he said, his voice clear and strong. The smartest person at this table. Thank God for her. My mother-in-law nodded, her eyes shining. Then Russell, from his seat, raised his glass, too. He looked right at me, his eyes clear and full of an admiration that was, after everything, finally earned. To Karina, I raised my glass and met his gaze. We were a long way from crayons and craft paper.